حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم اجعل قلبي بارا وامديسارا وإيشكارا ورزقدارا ولا دبرارا واجعل عند قبر نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم مستقرا وقرارا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد.
One more loud salawat, please. صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى نحمده ونستعينه ونثني عليه ونؤمن به ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف بريته ومبلغ رسالاته العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin this first Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will continue with the chapter of 40 hadith on the topic of seeking knowledge. This narration that was narrated from the sixth Imam who was quoting our beloved Prophet Muhammadin al-Mustafa salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. I will go through the narration one more time as we were breaking down this narration. The Prophet said, "Man salaka tariqan yatlubu fihi ilman, salakallahu bihi tariqan ila al-jannah." The Prophet said that the one who goes on a path, embarks on a path and a journey in which he tries to gain knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that path a path for him towards heaven. This is the first statement of the narration. وَإِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ, statement number 2, وَإِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ لَتَذَوَ أَجْنِحَتَهَا لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ رِضًا بِهِ, that the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place their wings beneath the feet of the one who goes to seek knowledge, رِضًا بِهِ, out of how pleased they are with him. In other words, because of the status that he has now achieved, the status that he has reached. وَإِنَّهُ, third statement, وَإِنَّهُ يَسْتَغْفِرُ لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and the one who seeks knowledge, everything in the heavens and the earth will do istighfar for him, or ask for forgiveness on his behalf. حَتَّى الْحُوتِ فِي الْبَحْرِ, even the whale in the sea or in the ocean. وَفَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ, and the status of the one who worships God with knowledge versus the one who only worships out of devotion. كَفَضْلِ الْقَمَرِ عَلَى سَائِرِ النُّجُومِ لَيْلَةَ الْبَدْرِ, is like the difference that you find between the moon and the stars. Now, these are very important lines. Knowledge is something that we lack within our communities. Inshallah, we'll come to that discussion a little bit further. وَإِنَّ الْعُلَمَاءَ وَرَثَةُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ, and the one who seeks knowledge is walking in the footsteps of the prophets. إِنَّ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ لَمْ يُوَرِّثُوا دِينَارًا وَلَا دِرْهَمًا. The messengers of God for their ummah and for their people, they did not leave behind wealth. They did not leave behind gold and silver for their people. What did they leave behind? وَلَكِنْ وَرَّثُوا الْعِلْمَ. They left behind a heritage. They left behind intellectual property. فَمَنْ أَخَذَ مِنْهُ أَخَذَ بِحَظٍ وَافِرٍ. The one who embraces this intellectual property has walked away with a great benefit. These were the lines from this narration of the book of Al-Kafi that the author of 40 Hadith is explaining to us. And we began our discussion on this topic last week. The first line of the narration says, مَنْ سَلَكَ طَرِيقًا يَطْلُبُ فِيهِ عِلْمًا. The one who goes on a path, embarking on a journey to gain knowledge. And I talked about this last week a little bit, and I'll touch on it this week as well, that when we talk about this knowledge, we automatically, typically think about someone who's dedicated his whole life to this path. Someone who's going to go study in the house of Qom or Najaf and so on and so forth. And though this narration would definitely cover a person like that, the narration is speaking of anyone who gains any religious knowledge. Therefore, the one who took out time on a day like this to make his way to come to Jumma Salaat, to learn something, to hear from the words of Quran and Ahl Bayt also falls within this category. There's spectrums to this. Anyone who seeks any form of knowledge, any form of religious knowledge, is going to fall under this category. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it a path towards heaven for him. We talked last week about the different levels of heaven. The heaven of the a'mal, the heaven of the deeds of the human being. We spoke about the heavens of the characteristics of the human being. Beyond just doing good deeds, sometimes the good deeds that a person does, it seeps into them so much that it becomes a characteristic of them. This is a different level of heaven, and we talked about this. Then there is a third heaven. It's called Jannatul Dhat, a third level of heaven, where the very essence of this person starts to move away. He doesn't see an independence for himself anymore, and this is a greater level of heaven. It's greater than the level of heaven that we hear about in narrations when they say, for example, if you do this good deed, you will get this reward. When the narration says, if you do this good deed, you get this reward, it's talking about the Jannatul A'mal, the heaven of deeds. It's a promise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. And even the heaven of deeds is something that is quite spectacular. It's quite amazing that the narration says, for example, if you cry a little bit for the third Imam, that your sins are forgiven. If you show kindness to your parents, your sins are forgiven. The ways to have your sins forgiven, we've had talks on this before for all of you who remember. And the other rewards that are mentioned, this is all Jannatul A'mal. This is all in the heaven of deeds. Now, if this seeps into this person and he becomes a generous person, he becomes a modest person, not just a person who does generosity from time to time. He becomes a generous person. This person now enters into the next realms of this heaven. This is called Jannatul Sifat, the Jannah of characteristics, and the third level as well. Okay, we're going to move on to the next line because this next line speaks of an idea that if we're looking at it from a materialistic perspective, makes no sense at all. And what is that? What is the claim that this hadith is making? The claim is that the moment you embark on this journey, you open up this Quran, you start listening to this lecture, whatever the case might be, that in this process, angels descend upon you and they want to place their wings beneath your feet. This is a very big claim. This is not a small claim. Okay, so the author of 40 Hadith starts to talk about this, and we talked and spoke a little bit last week about the different types of angels. Now, out of these different types of angels that exist in this world, there are angels that reside in this realm and in this world, the angels that deal with the dunya. They are at a lower level. There are angels that reside in a different realm called the realm of barzakh. They are of a higher level. There are angels that reside in the realm of aql, meaning there's no shape, there's no form for them. And so those of them who are the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the narration says they have wings and they place these wings beneath the feet of the one who gains knowledge, for them this is definitely a metaphor, because this is not an angel that belongs to this realm. It's an angel that belongs to a realm where things don't have shape and form for them to even have wings. The angels that have to do with the lower realms, yes, maybe they have wings, maybe they have other characteristics that the Quran has spoken about from time to time. The important point, though, is that an angel that comes from greater realms, though he doesn't belong to this realm, because he comes from a realm that is greater than this realm, he can take on a physical appearance, or what appears to you and I as a physical appearance. He's not bound by matter the way you and I are bound by matter. We're bound, we're limited. We're limited by time and place, yes? He's not bound by time and place, but he can have an appearance similar to your appearance and my appearance. Because he comes from a greater realm, he can impact this realm that we live in. So what does this mean on a practical level? On a practical level, what this means is that we have in multiple narrations from the Ahlul Bayt instances where angels would take on an appearance similar to the appearance of the human being. And we have in the seerah of the Prophet times where the Prophet was speaking to someone and people would pass by this person and they would assume it's a human being. Whereas multiple narrations tell us, in the Shia school of thought and in the Sunni school of thought, tell us that in fact this person who had a physical appearance similar to that of human beings was in fact not a human being, was in fact Jibreel himself. Where did this happen? This happened in the story of our beloved prophets, where sometimes when Jibreel wanted to approach the Prophet, he would approach the Prophet in the physical appearance of a man by the name of Dihya al-Kalbi. Dihya al-Kalbi. Dihya was known for his appealing appearance. He looked good, I put it simply, yes? He looked good, right? And this is why Jibreel sometimes would appear to the Prophet in the form of Dihya al-Kalbi. Not that Jibreel would become matter like you and I are matter. He would appear as so. He would present himself as so. And you find this in multiple other parts of Islamic history as well. And maybe beyond any of these examples, the best example to point out is what? Is that portion of the story of Mary, Lady Maryam, where the angel came and presented himself to her. The Quran speaks about this. Now, this is, and now we're just past Christmas and all of this kind of stuff, so it goes very well with the day and age and the days that we are going through. When you look at the story of Mary in the Bible versus the story of Mary or Maryam in the Quran, you find some very big differences. Allah salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Of those differences that we find is the following. In the story of Maryam in the Quran, Maryam herself has a high status before she even becomes the mother of Isa alayhi salam. This is very important. She is given a very high status before she becomes the mother of Isa alayhi salam, or as they would refer to it in the Christian faith, the mother of the Lord. Yes? Beforehand, she already has a very high status. And yes, because of that high status, she is then given this opportunity to give birth without being married and so on and so forth to any man, give birth to Isa alayhi salam. Within the Bible, this interaction that we're about to go through does not occur. Why? Because the news of Mary being pregnant with a child in the Bible, I believe it's the Gospel of Luke in particular, does not occur by an angel coming and speaking to Maryam. It occurs how? It occurs by Joseph, the husband of Maryam, having a dream that his wife is in fact pregnant, okay? And that they are expecting a child. The Quran, however, speaks of Maryam on a different level. It speaks of the status of Mary on a different level. Why? Because the Quran says Mary was special before she even gave birth to Isa alayhi salam. And this is why we find that out of all of the people who used to live in that day and age, it was Lady Maryam who the angel took on a physical appearance to speak to. Yes? There were many others, they never got the opportunity to witness this moment. They never reached the status to speak to an angel. Who reached the status to be able to have an angel of Allah come and appear in physical appearance and speak to her. This was none but Lady Maryam. Yeah. So what does the Quran say about her? The Quran goes through these verses. These are very, special verses of the Quran. فَاتَّخَذَتْ مِن دُونِهِمْ حِجَابًا. When Maryam knew that now the time has come, she separated herself from her people. فَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهَا رُوحَنَا. So we sent to her ruhana. We sent to her our spirits. Generally, Islamic scholars understand our spirits to refer to who? To refer to the angel Jibra'il. فَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهَا رُوحَنَا. So we sent Jibra'il to her. فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. Jibra'il, who in fact is from a greater realm. He is min al-malaikati al-muqarrabin. He's from the closest angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He appeared as though, the Quran doesn't say he became material. The Quran says, فَتَمَثَّلَ. It appeared as though he was basharan sawiya. It appeared as though he was a human being, just like any other human being. Sawi means a human being that every part of his body is in the right parts. Yes? The head at the top and so on and so forth. فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. Who reached this status? Lady Maryam reached this status. Okay, so the author of 40 Hadith then continues. And he says, listen, when the narration says the angels come and put their wings beneath the feet of the one who is seeking knowledge, this is a reality that happens. You say, but I don't see it. I'm seeking knowledge right now. I'm reading Quran right now. I'm trying to engage with the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt. I don't see these angels. Yes, because you're not at that status to see an angel appear in front of you. There are servants of God, they reach a status, فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. Not everyone saw the angel Jibra'il speaking to Maryam. Who saw the angel speaking to them? Maryam herself saw this. What does this mean? This means this is a reality that takes place. It just depends on whether or not you have reached the status to be able to see this reality. There are some human beings, they will never come across an angel in their life. I probably fall under that category, yes? I'll never probably come across an angel. Why? Because my akhlaq is not even good enough, my worship is not even good enough, my good deeds are not even good enough, so on and so forth. Then if the human being continues to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he can reach a status where he interacts with the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he can reach a status where the angel is left behind and this human being needs to continue on his path. Meaning the human being as such a high status where the angel can no longer keep up with him. Where did this happen? In the story of Mi'raj, where the Prophet was going through these heavens. At one point, according to some accounts, Jibreel turned around to the Prophet and said, لَوْ دَنَوْتُ أَنْمُلَةً. If I come forward even a little step, لَحْتَرَقْتُ. Yes? My wings will burn. Yes? He's not talking about actual burning. Saying my status doesn't allow to come any further. This is that part of the journey that the human being goes and the angels are even left behind. So you look at the full spectrum of the human being. This is you and I, by the way. This is who you and I are. The full spectrum of the human being. He can start at a point where they tell him angels are around him and he doesn't even recognize. That's you and I. Then he can reach a point where he starts to recognize and interact with these angels. These are the righteous servants of God. Then he can reach a point where he goes beyond the level of the angels and the angels can't catch up with him. All of this spectrum is the human being. It just depends on what he wants to do with his life. It just depends on how much of his potential he wants to fulfill by showing obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is exactly what Lady Maryam has done. And I'll add this point before I move on, inshallah, to the next line. This backstory of Lady Maryam is something you don't find in the Bible. The backstory, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how Maryam, she wanted to come and worship in the temple and they were giving her trouble and so on and so forth. This backstory, you don't find it in the Bible. The story of Maryam in the Bible and in the Gospels starts from where? When she was told that she was going to be giving birth to Isa alayhi salam. This backstory is something that the Quran has spoken about, and this is what the Quran did. So many of these stories that you find in other religions, in Judaism and in Christianity in particular, The Quran came to give us the full version of this story. That's why you find so many commonalities between them, but you also find major differences between them as well. So, the author of 40 Hadith says, the promise that the Prophet has given us is that the one who is on this path of seeking knowledge, the angels come and place their wings beneath his feet because of the status that he has reached. Now, you don't understand this, you don't feel this, that's on you. Because there's some servants of God, they interact with these angels. There's some servants of God, they feel the presence of the angels. Let's move on, inshallah, to the next line. Aloud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The next promise of the Prophet was what? وَإِنَّهُ يَسْتَغْفِرُ لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ. And everything in the heavens and earth, they ask for forgiveness on behalf of the one who is seeking knowledge. حَتَّى الْحُوتِ فِي الْبَحْرِ. Even the whale in the ocean. Okay, so the question is this again a metaphor, or is this literally what the narration is telling us? So you're telling me, when I'm on this path to seek knowledge, this plant I'm standing beside me, random plant, is asking for the forgiveness of someone like me. And you're telling me the fish in the ocean, they're asking for forgiveness for me. And beyond that, are these things even alive? Do they even understand what I do as a human being? They're living their life. I thought this fish was supposed to live his own life. I'm supposed to live my own life. What connection is there between what I do and the action of this fish and this plant and every other creature of God that you see around you? Yes? What Quran and Hadith tells us is that this is literal. It's not metaphorical. This is literally what happens. Where does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak of this idea? Surah Al-Isra, verse 44. تُسَبِّحُ لَهُ السَّمَاوَاتُ السَّبْعَ. The seven heavens, they are glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْأَرْضُ, and the earth. وَمَنْ فِيهِنْ, and everything that's in the earth, everything that's in the seven heavens, they're glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. And there's nothing, no creature, except that it is glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you might say, okay, they're glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a metaphor, so on and so forth. Then the Quran adds this line. That's why Allama Tabatabai, when he comes to this line, he says, no, the Quran is very clear that this tasbih, that these creatures are doing is literal, meaning they are alive, number one. Number two, they understand what you do. And number three, they interact with you. Okay, these three levels. What is this line? The Quran says, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُم. But when they glorify God, you don't understand. If the Quran is saying you don't understand, what does that mean? That means it's literal. They're actually doing this. So the Quran tells us the creatures around the world, they are constantly understanding of the reality around them. So what does this mean? This means that the ground that you and I walk on, there is a difference when a sinner walks on this earth and when an obedient servant of God walks on the earth. The earth that he walks on, because it's a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is number one, living. Number two, understands who's coming, who's going. There's a big difference here. This is why you find this narration in Al-Kafi. This is a narration from Jabir, famous companion of the Prophet, who's narrating from the fifth Imam, who is quoting directly the Prophet Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And the Prophet says, إِنِّي كُنْتُ أَنْظُرُ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ وَالْغَنَمِ وَأَنَا أَرْعَاهَا. He says, before I became a prophet in the official sense of the word, I used to go, and part of the work that the Prophet used to do is dealing with the cattle and shepherding, being a shepherd and so on and so forth. He says, I remember seeing the cattle. From one point, they used to run all of a sudden from one corner to another corner to another corner. From our perspective, it seems very haphazard. It seems very random what's happening. So the Prophet says, وَكُنْتُ أَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهَا قَبْلَ النُّبُوَّةِ وَهِيَ مُتَمَكِّنَةٌ فِي الْمَكِينَةِ مَا حَوْلَهَا شَيْءٌ يُهَيِّجُهَا. The cattle would go to one corner, and they were, in my words, they were spending time there. They were, grazing on the grass in that area. And there was nothing to bring them fear. There was nothing that was going to attack them. But all of a sudden, this cattle would move from one corner to another corner. And this is before the prophethood. So he says, فَأَقُولُ مَا هَذَا وَمَا أَعْجَبَ هَذَا. This is interesting. Now sometimes cattle, you throw a rock, for example, or there's, a wolf, for example, or a dog or whatever, then they go from one corner to another. It makes sense. But without any cause, just going from one side to the other side, the Prophet says, I didn't know what this was. حَتَّى حَدَّثَنِي جِبْرَائِيل. Until that time came where now I was, the prophethood had began and Jibra'il was speaking to me. And he said, أَنَّ الْكَافِرَ, that the disbeliever يُضْرَبُ ضَرْبَةً مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا سَمِعَهَا. He said, Jibra'il taught me that the reason why this cattle, they go from one side to the other side and so on and so forth. And this may not be the only reason, but the narration is saying this is one of the reasons. Say, you know why they go from one side to the other side? Is because there are servants of God who are so disobedient, they are in punishments. And you don't have to look far to see servants of God like this today. Yes, you can only look at Palestine and what's happening. You'll see servants like this who will be punished, definitely. Yes? He said there are servants of God who are punished. No one else hears their punishments except for these animals and these creatures. The human beings don't hear this punishment. Human beings are busy living their lives. Who hears this punishment? The animals hear this punishment. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes these servants, from the fear of the sound of what they hear, they run from one corner to the other corner. This is in Al-Kafi. Yes? You guys know I'm very particular about narrating hadith from early sources. يُضْرَبُ ضَرْبَةً مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا سَمِعَهَا. Everything that God has created hears the sound of that punishment. وَيُذْعَرُ لَهَا. And that's why they get fearful. They run from one side to the other side. فَقُلْتُ ذَلِكَ لِضَرْبَةِ الْكَافِرِ فَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ عَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ. The Prophet says, I told Jibreel, this is what happens to the disbeliever when he enters into the next realm. I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from falling within that category. What does this tell you? This tells you that every creature around us is living, breathing. Number two, has the intellect to understand the realities that Quran and Hadith is speaking about. So if the narration comes and says, yes, when you go on this path, everything in the heavens and earth is asking for forgiveness on your behalf. This is literal. This is not a metaphor. You have come to understand it as a metaphor. I've come to understand it as a metaphor because we think the creatures around us are dead. We think the creatures around us don't understand. They don't have an understanding of the world. But Quran and Hadith tells us they have an understanding of the world. And this is why I'll end this first khutbah with this idea. This is why you find, brothers and sisters, that you and I are ordered to give adhan and iqamah, mustahab, yes, to give adhan and iqamah, even when there's no one else around. You ever thought about this? You and I, it's mustahab for us to give adhan and iqamah for our salat, yes? Okay, go ask the average Muslim. Say, why do you give adhan and iqamah? He'll tell you, adhan and iqamah is a call to prayer, to call people so they come and pray. But it's mustahab for you to give adhan and iqamah when you're alone. So who are you calling to come and pray? Who are you calling to come and join this gathering? Yes? This is why we have in our narrations that the 4 takbirat that you give at the beginning of your salat, calling the people to come to pray is only a small portion of those who you are actually calling to come and pray. The bigger portion of those that you are calling to come and pray with you is all of the creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you find around you. So this ground that you're walking on has an understanding. The animals you come across, they have an understanding. The plants you come across, everything around you has an understanding. And that is why you give adhan, you call them to come and pray. Oh, but there's no one else around me. The human beings aren't around you. And God would tell you, yes, the human beings are the smallest portion of those that you're supposed to call to come and pray with you. That's why it's mustahab for you to give adhan and iqamah whether there are other people around you or there aren't other people around you. Because whether there are people or there aren't people, you know who does exist around you? All of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you are part of this creation. You're part of this harmony that you find in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of this is happening around us, brothers and sisters. And you and I speak of myself, we're only busy with the materialistic aspect of life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to lift our heads and see the realities that are taking place around us. That is what Quran and Hadith came for. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are those who live with this understanding of life, inshaAllah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. أثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا ثم أصلي وأسلم على نجيبه وجليله وحافظ سره الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأراضين بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على علي أمير المؤمنين وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبطي نبي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في أرضك. صلوات. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin the second Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We reach verses from Surah Al-Waqi'ah. فَلَوْلَا إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْحُلْقُومُ وَأَنْتُمْ حِينَئِذٍ تَنْظُرُونَ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُبْصِرُونَ فَلَوْلَا إِن كُنْتُمْ غَيْرَ مَدِينِينَ تَرْجِعُونَهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. These final verses of Surah Al-Waqi'ah that were speaking to us of the final moments of the life of the human being. And we said that this moment where the soul reaches the throat of the human being, the hulqum of the human being, has become a part of the terminology and the vocabulary of the Ahlul Bayt. Hence you will find in a multitude of narrations, they will speak of this idea that when your soul reaches the throat, this will happen. When the soul reaches your throat, that will happen. And we went through some of those narrations. A couple more I want to add, inshallah, before we continue and wrap up the tafsir of Surah Al-Waqi'ah. The narration is from Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Companion of the first Imam, his name is Harith Hamdani. Harith was a famous companion of the first Imam. The first Imam has a famous line that he told Harith al-Hamdani. He said, Ya Haru Hamdan. Yes, Har was they used to use shortcuts for names back in the day, yes? It's an abbreviation of his name. His name was Harith. The Imam, out of love, used to call him Har. That was the way they used to refer to each other back in the day. Harith Hamdani was given this response from the first Imam that Man yamut yarani. Whoever leaves this world sees me. This is of those teachings that if you go back to our earliest sources and you sift through the narrations, you will find that this is something that has been understood unanimously within our school of thoughts. That every human being who dies in the sense that he does not come back to life. Some people, they leave this world and then they return. Yes? Near-death experiences happen all the time. Person who leaves but does not return, that he definitely sees the Prophet and he sees the first Imam. This is something that you find in a multitude of narrations. This narration is along those lines. Harith says, دَخَلْتُ عَلَى أَمِيرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. I came and entered into the room where the first Imam was. فَقَالَ مَا جَاءَ بِكَ. He turned to me and asked a question. He said, Harith, what's brought you here? Like, what do you need? What have you come for? فَقُلْتُ. I said, حُبِّي لَكَ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. My love for you. I love you so much. I wanted to come see you. I wanted to come visit you, so on and so forth. فَقَالَ يَا حَارِث أَتُحِبُّنِي. Harith, you really have a love and affection for me? So when he's asking this question, he's not doubting Harith. He's trying to set up the stage because he's going to make a claim that is very grand. He's going to make a statement that's very grand. So he says, Ya Harith, atuhibbuni? You love me? فقلت نعم والله. I swear by Allah, I do. قال أما, no. لو بلغت نفسك الحلقوم. This famous terminology, famous vocabulary. Know then that if you love me, that when your soul reaches al-hulqum, رأيتني حيث تحب. You will see me, but you will see me in a way that is very pleasing to you. Yes? As opposed to someone who disliked the Prophet or disliked the Ahlul Bayt, where they see them, but they see them in a very displeasing manner. They see them in a way where they see them as their enemies. Yes? He said, Harith, you will see me in a beautiful manner. وَلَوْ رَأَيْتَنِي وَأَنَا أَذُودُ الرِّجَالِ عَنِ الْحَوْضِ. And when you come to the Hawd and you see the Hawd of Kawthar, the fountain of Kawthar in heaven, and you see people are coming towards the Hawd and they are thirsty because they want to drink from the fountain of Kawthar, you will see I am giving them from the fountain of Kawthar. As we have narrations that this Hawd that belongs to the Prophet, it is the first Imam who is handing these glasses and these cups. Metaphors, of course, but this is a reality that the narrations are speaking of. He said, Ya Harithu Hamdan, if you see me over there, you will see me haythu tuhib. It will be very pleasing for you when you come on that day. What is he trying to say? Saying in those moments where people are desperate, because of your love for me, you will see me in a very pleasing situation. You will have nothing to worry about, is what he's saying. وَلَوْ رَأَيْتَنِي, and when you see me, وَأَنَا مَارٌ عَلَى الصِّرَاطِ, you see me walking on the bridge of Sirat, بِلِوَاءِ الْحَمْدِ بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, you see me walking in front of the Prophet, carrying his flag, because the first Imam carried the flag of the Prophet in his wars, and in multiple narrations we have that the first Imam carries the flag of the Prophet on the Day of Judgment as well. He says, when you see me there, you will see me in a pleasing manner as well. Meaning over there you also have nothing to worry about. And hence you find multiple narrations from the Ahlul Bayt. Constantly they used to say, just hold on to your faith, obey God until the soul reaches the hulqum. Because once that happens, then all of the pain is going to go away. And everything that you were hoping for and wishing for is now going to open its doors to you. So you find in a second narration, and this one is from the sixth Imam, Al-Imam As-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu. The sixth Imam was asked by his companion, بَلَغَنِي عَنْكَ حَدِيثٌ. He said, I've heard a hadith from you. Can I check it with you? قُلْتُ قَالَ وَمَا هُوَ. He said, go ahead. What have you heard of me? Now, side note, this is extremely crucial in the understanding and the science of hadith. The fact that you have someone who speaks on the behalf of the Prophet 100 years after the Prophet is no longer around makes a world of difference in the science of hadith. Versus putting together a book, as in the case of Bukhari, Muslim, and others who came later, hundreds, 200 years after the Prophet is no longer around. And you don't have anyone who speaks on the behalf of the Prophet either. Yes, you have companions, but one companion says one thing, the other companion says a different thing, this one says this one says that. Versus having individuals who speak on behalf of the Prophet. This makes a big difference. Why does it make a big difference? This companion, he says, I've heard this hadith. Let me check the hadith. He has a living imam in front of him where he can do what? He can check the hadith. This makes a world of difference. And this has happened on a number of occasions where companions of the Prophet or the imams used to come to them. Ya Ibn Rasulullah, I've heard this. Is this true? I've heard that. Is this true? Now imagine if you don't have 12 imams following the Prophet to be able to verify your information with them. This makes a big difference. Nonetheless, he says, I've heard this hadith. The hadith is this, that the one who believes in this path. Now in this narration particularly, he's referring to the issue of wilaya and a person who follows the Ahlul Bayt. That this person, his position is so amazing the moment his soul reaches his throat. Is this something you said? So the Imam, he approves. He said, فَقَالَ نَعَمْ إِنَّمَا يُغْتَبَةُ أَهْلُ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ إِذَا بَلَغَتْ هَذِهِ. And he pointed to his throat. أَمَّا, this line is for you and I. He said, you know what happens when his soul reaches his throat? أَمَّا مَا كَانَ يَتَخَوَّفُ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا فَقَدْ وَلَّى عَنْ. Everything that he feared from the pains, the difficulties, the concerns of this world, فَقَدْ وَلَّى عَنْ. It's turned away. He doesn't have to worry about them anymore. And he continued. He said, وَأَمَامُهُ, and in front of him is what? So this is all behind him. What is he looking towards? وَأَمَامُهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَعَلِيٌّ وَالْحَسَنُ وَالْحُسَيْنُ صَلَوَاتُ اللَّهِ وَسَلَامُهُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. اللهم صل على محمد. Okay, the Quran speaks to us of this moment. Now, as we return back to the verses of the Quran of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, he said, why is it in these moments when you have this person in front of you and he's leaving this world, you can't bring his soul back? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has authority. Okay, then the verses continue and they return back to the categorization that we had at the beginning of Surah Al-Waqi'ah. At the beginning of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, we had three groups. وَكُنْتُمْ أَزْوَاجًا ثَلَاثًا. You will be three groups. Ashabul Maymana, Ashabul Mash'ama, and the very special servants of God, As-Sabiqun, As-Sabiqun. So the narration of the core verses of the Quran now return back to that categorization. Except there's one big difference. What is the big difference? Those categorizations were for the Day of Judgment. إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ. When the event takes place. Referring to when? The Day of Judgment. These are referring what? To the moment immediately following death. In other words, the first categorization referring to the Day of Judgment. This categorization is referring to the world of Barzakh. Before the Day of Judgment even begins. Makes a big difference. Why? Because then this person is automatically placed in this category of the good servants of God until he waits until the Day of Judgment starts and begins. He's also in bliss and blessing. This is why it makes a big difference. So the verse of the Quran says, when his soul leaves his throat, فَأَمَّا إِن كَانَ مِنَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ. If he was a close servant of God, فَرَوْحٌ وَرَيْحَانٌ وَجَنَّةُ نَعِيمٌ. Well, rawh means what? Rawh means that thing that brings convenience, ease. He has nothing to worry about anymore. Rayhan, beautiful scent. وَجَنَّةُ نَعِيمٌ. And guess what? This is just for him right now. Then he's looking towards his ultimate heaven. Because this is barzakh. This is not the Day of Judgment. So he is in this, in my words, mini heaven. But he's looking towards what? The ultimate heaven. And this is one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the righteous servants. That before they enter into heaven, they see what is prepared for them. This is very important. The Quran says on the Day of Judgment, people will come, they're going to enter into heaven. لَمْ يَدْخُلُوهَا. They haven't entered it yet. وَهُمْ يَتْمَعُونَ. And they're waiting. This is the one who looks forward to the Day of Judgment. There are people, they live their life in a way, they're afraid of the Day of Judgment. They don't want it to happen. Then the Quran says there are people, they look forward to the Day of Judgment because they're waiting for their ultimate heaven. So he says, this is this group. Okay, great. I'm putting this in my terminology as I'm wrapping up, inshallah. In my terminology, this is great, but this is not going to apply to me. So this is not very helpful because muqarrabeen are those special servants of God. That's not me. Okay, so what else do you have? What other category is there that I can possibly fit into? Okay, God's merciful. Let's see what we can do. Verse 90, وَأَمَّا إِن كَانَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينَ. But if he's not muqarrabeen, he's not all the way at the top, maybe he can be ashabul yamin. He can be amongst those who their book of deeds is given to their right hand. Okay, now I have some more hope because maybe this category I can fall into. Okay, it says, what about them? The Quran says this line, verse 91, فَالسَّلَامٌ لَكَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينَ. And there's multiple interpretations of what does this mean? Salamun laka, salam to you, or salam upon you from Ashabul Yamin. Multiple interpretations. The first interpretation is this person, when he enters into the next realm, the souls of righteous believers come to him, min Ashabul Yamin. They welcome him into this realm. This is all, by the way, the stuff that we were taught is scary. This is the stuff we were taught, oh, they put you into the grave and then they come for you, huh? Then Nakir and Munkar come for you. They're going to squeeze you in a way where everything you ever ate, everything you ever drank, are these punishments real? Absolutely. But for the one who doesn't fall into these categories, for the one who doesn't prepare, are these punishments real? Yes. The categorizations aren't done. I've been through 2 of the categorizations. Yes, the third one is still there. But let's see, how much does the Quran say fall into number 1 and number 2? versus who falls into number 3. This is very important. He said, وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينِ. If he is from أَصْحَابُ الْيَمِينِ فَالسَّلَامٌ لَكَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينِ. One interpretation, those souls come and welcome him. The second interpretation is that no, they're in such a good place that they send their salam to you, Ya Rasulullah. Meaning they're in such a wonderful place, they are showing that they are in a place that's pleasing to them. And there's a third interpretation as well. Regardless, what's very clear, Ashabul Yameen are in an amazing place. They have nothing to worry about, whichever interpretation you go with. They're doing amazing. Third interpretation is that God sends his salam to them and tells them that you are min Ashabul Yameen. Fasalamun laka, because you are min Ashabul Yameen. Regardless, they're doing amazing. Okay, great. So who's this third category? Because you have to figure out who this third category is to see if you fit into category number 1 or number 2. It's category number 3. So let's see what category number 3 is. It says, وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الضَّالِّينَ. But then there's a category number 3. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes? He says there's a category number 3, they're in trouble. Okay, so who qualifies for category number 3? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions 2 qualifications. He says, وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الضَّالِّينَ. But you know what? If this guy whose soul reached the throat and now he's entered into this realm, if he is amongst those who knowingly rejected our message, and because of that was misguided. So the Quran didn't say, وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الظَّالِّينَ. The Quran didn't say if he was misguided. What did the Quran say? وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الظَّالِّينَ. He's misguided because of his own doing. Okay, yes, the Quran says this one is in trouble. فَنُزُلٌ مِّنْ حَمِيمٍ. His situation is boiling water. That's what he's going to be dealing with. وَتَسْلِيَةُ جَحِيمٍ. He's going to be dealing with hellfire. So now I ask you, and this is a message for all of our adults and all of our youth and all of our children, because this is something we have to understand at a younger age. This is very, very crucial. Very crucial. I wish someone had taught me this at a younger age. Okay, that's how crucial it is. The Quran says the people who end up with these punishments, is it the one who sometimes has some shortcomings and then he repents? No. Does the Quran say the one who had some slip-ups and then he says, Ya Allah, forgive me, he's going to deal with nuzulun min hamim? No. The Quran said what? وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الظَّالِّينَ. The one who denies the truth. How many people fall under this category? How many people would end up in this category? Are there people who would end up? Sure, there are people. The Quran is very clear about this. But how many people fall under this category that deal with this hellfire? Abad al-abidin, forever. It's very difficult to think of maybe 10, 20, 30, however many you can think of would fall under this category. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anytime we preach Islam, and you guys know I'm not some progressive preacher who just wants to change the verses of the Quran just so we feel better about ourselves, yes? Anytime we preach the religion of Islam and the picture we portray is that yes, everyone is going to burn and only the Ahl Bayt make it out. This is wrong. This doesn't mesh with Quran. It's not the message of Quran. The message of Quran is, if you're Ashabul Muqarrabeen, well, good for you. You have nothing to worry about. If you're Ashabul Yameen, you're also going to do very well. Yes, if you are Mukaththibeen al-Dhalin, yes, you should be worried. Yes, you are in trouble. You need to change paths while you're still breathing. وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الظَّالِينَ فَنُزُلٌ مِّنْ حَمِيمٍ وَتَصْلِيَةُ جَحِيمٍ. And the Quran says, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْحَقُّ الْيَقِينَ. This is indisputable truth. This is definitely going to happen. So, Ya Rasulullah, now that you see we are in charge, we're the ones who are running the show. Your position is going to be determined based on how you are obedient or disobedient. فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمَ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. So now glorify your Lord, the one who is in charge of everything, because he's the one who's running the show. Yes, in this world, brothers and sisters, when you look at Palestine today, it very much looks like other people run the world. This is the reality of the world that we live in. It very much looks like there are other people on personal whim, based on the temperature of the weather or the day of the week, they can press a button and kill people. You saw an interview, it was broadcasted in French television, yes, of a mother of one of these soldiers. And she looked straight into the camera and she said, I need to tell our politicians, they need to press that button, because if anyone is going to live in Gaza, it has to be us. If we're not going to live there, no one else has the right to live there either. Yes, in this world, it feels as though there are other people running the show. This is the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for this world. Yes? It's free will. People come, they do their things. The Quran says, listen, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi'ad. You don't remember Ad and Thamud. And you don't remember Fir'auna dhil awtad. You don't remember Pharaoh, the one who everyone used to look at his empire and just be like, man, who's going to defeat this guy? He has control over everything. He does everything. وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ الَّذِينَ تَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ. The type of transgressing that they did within cities. And people used to look at this empire and say, who's going to stop him? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did it in His own way. Yes, today, it looks like there's other people running the world. But this is all within the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, they're all playing in the game of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll call it that. Why? Because the moment إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْحُلْقُومِ, then your power and your authority and all this, none of this matters. What matters now is which of these three categories you fall under. And these politicians, so many of them, will definitely fall under category number 3. You know, one of the younger brothers, I was discussing this before Jumma with him. He said, Sheikh, we can't judge the intentions of people and so on and so forth. I said, yeah, that's true. For a lot of people, you can't really tell. Does this person have bad intentions or good intentions? And that's why in Islam we're taught not to worry about people's intentions too much. But then there's a small percentage, very small percentage of people in the world that you look at them, you can tell this person knows the pain they're causing. This person knows the lives that they're taking. And this person knows the impact of the occupation that he is perpetrating. And he's still fine with it. Yes, this is what the Quran talks about. وَأَمَّا إِن كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الضَّالِّينَ فَنُزُلٌ مِّنْ حَمِيمٍ وَتَصْلِيَةُ جَحِيمٍ. Then you have innocent civilians who are sleeping in their homes, and then the father goes to buy some biscuits or a snack for the child. By the time he gets back, this child is no longer there. So what happens to him? This is rawhun wa rayhanun wa jannatu na'im. It's a big stark difference between the experience that this one has and the experience that this evil politician will have. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He places us amongst those who the moment the soul reaches our throat is the beginning of our rejoice and the beginning of our hope and the beginning of our pleasures and our bliss and blessing. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. وأن عليا حجة الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. يا محسن قد أتاك المسيء وقد أمرت المحسن أن يتجاوز عن المسيء. أنت المحسن وأنا المسيء فبحق محمد وآل محمد صل على محمد وآل محمد وتجاوز عن قبيح ما تعلم مني. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما. قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم أغن كل فقير. اللهم أشبع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل عريان. اللهم اقضي دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اقضي عنا الدين واغننا من الفقر، إنك على كل شيء قدير. صلوات.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على وأن عليا حجة الله. صلاة الله وسلامه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب. صلاة العصر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
وملائكته يصلون على النبي.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما شاء الله لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, recite dua wahidat all together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون. لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين. لا إله إلا الله وحده وحده أنجز وعدا ونصر عبدا وعز جندا وهزم الأحزاب وحده. وله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير.
اللهم
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل